Happy Douglas Week, everyone, and a warm hello to everyone joining us on YouTube today. Thank you for being here with us on the second day of Douglas Week and for your interest in our event series. My name is Dr. Caroline Dunham-Schroeder, and I'm the founder of Douglas Week, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this specific event called Fulbright Alumni Discuss Human Rights and Social Activism. And this year, for our third Douglas Week, we are thrilled to be online around the world and in person in Rochester, New York, where Frederick Douglass and his family lived for over 25 years. And as you probably know by now, each year, Douglas Week celebrates Frederick Douglass around the world, but we also celebrate the many transatlantic connections between Ireland and the US. And we're very grateful for the many participants, the presenters, the co-creators, and the attendees who have been inspired to respond to the history and the story of Douglass and other change makers. And it's so inspiring to share with you all, to collaborate, to co-create, and to learn so much more about personal and contemporary contexts through many different mediums each year. And today we're excited to be joined by some new and some returning collaborators of Douglas Week. And I'm joined by Executive Director of the Fulbright Commission in Ireland, Dr. Dara Fitzgerald, who will speak with three wonderful Fulbright Award alumni about human rights and social activism as part of Douglas Week 23. So those are obviously two central parts of and topics of our event series as well. So on that note, welcome to our wonderful panelists and our moderator. And we're very happy that you are all able to join us today for this inspiring conversation. And to everyone watching online, we hope that you enjoy this Douglas Week event. And if you like this event, make sure to check out our website and to follow us on social media to learn more. And I will now hand over to Dr. Fitzgerald to introduce our panelists. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Happy Douglas Week.
Thank you, Caroline, for such a lovely introduction, and hello to everybody. Welcome to the Fulbright Ireland celebration of Douglas Week 2023. I want to thank our ongoing collaboration, obviously, with the Douglas Family Initiatives, in particular, Kristen Leary, and also to thank Caroline as well for her ongoing engagement with the program. So today we're here, I guess, to talk about Fulbright and Fulbrighters, Fulbright alum who have over many years been engaged with areas of social activism and human rights and civic engagement through many different aspects of the program and in their own personal research and their work. Today, I think we're very, very lucky to have three great speakers and three great Fulbrighters. Fulbrighters being a Fulbright alum and Fulbright members of the Fulbright family. And it's lovely that we'll get an opportunity to talk and listen to them as they share their experiences specifically related to Fulbright. So the three people that we have here today are Grace Oladipo, and Grace is an award-winning social entrepreneur and human rights educator. She was born in Nigeria and she grew up in Ireland and takes pride in being Nigerian and Irish. She graduated from University College Dublin in 2020 with a degree in law. She then pursued an LLM in international human rights law as a Fulbrighter at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana, the USA. She received the Faculty Award for Excellence in International Law and was selected to receive funding to study at the Hague Academy of International Law. She then went on to work at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva. Grace is founder of the She Leads Lab and of the Human Rights Pod. So it's lovely to speak to you, Grace. The second person to join us today then is Raphael Onwunali. And Raphael is entering the second year of his Master's in Public Policy degree at the University of Chicago as an Irish Fulbright and George Moore Student Scholar. He is the inaugural recipient of the Fulbright Frederick and Anna Douglas Award from the Fulbright Commission. He holds a Master of Laws degrees from University College London and a BA in Law and International Languages from Dublin City University. Raphael aspires to marry his knowledge of law and public policy together to resolve some of the most significant issues affecting the world today. He's founder of the Leonardo da Vinci Initiative and a global shaper as part of the World Economic Forum Global Shapers Program. So lovely to see you here today as well, Raphael.
Thank you.
And last, and an excellent speaker, third Fulbright to join us is Dr. Matthew O'Brien. Matthew's PhD is entitled Political Education and Black Power Activism in Chicago, 1968 to 1983. As a 2019 Fulbright student to the University of Illinois in Chicago, Matthew conducted primary research concerning community groups and organizations who embodied Black empowerment and progression in the turbulent 1970s. Matthew lectures at University College Dublin. His research interests include social movements, race activism, and oral history. Matthew is the treasurer of the Oral History Network of Ireland and is presently engaged in the European Regional Development Fund project on coastal uplands, heritage and tourism, where he's conducting oral history interviews with people from County Wicklow and County Wexford. So we have a very illustrious panel today, and we're very interested in getting their opinions and the pamphlets that they could verbally write for us as well. Before we just jump into some questions, I just wanted to give a small background to the Fulbright program and our engagement with this. We have a All Disciplines Award, which actually over the years has really bent all disciplines across many different areas, from law to biotechnology to economics, etc. And in many senses, a lot of the people who have taken up those awards have been activists, have been social activists, have been interested in human rights and all those aspects of it. To some extent, it can be a guiding principle of a lot of really good Fulbright alum, is that they're passionate about their area and the impacts of those areas and all that. And we have some specific awards then that do also directly impact on areas of social activism and human rights. One is obviously the award that Grace went on, and that's with the University in Indiana, and that's been in Notre Dame, and that's been a very interesting award, and it's been great to continue that program and that engagement with them. And then Raphael, as Caroline mentioned, was the first winner of the Irish side of the Frederick and Anna Douglas Award. We do have a US side as well, and we will have a US student coming across in this year as well. So as a Fulbright program, we do have really interesting people coming with their activism hats on, with their human rights hats on, sometimes in their own very specific areas. And I think that gives us a great opportunity then to maybe start the discussion. And I'm going to start off, really this question is to all three of our panelists. Might start off with Grace just when I come through the question, but we're particularly interested, I guess. Can you outline your specific interests in human rights and civil or social engagement, and why and how your interests develop? So Grace, kicking off with you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah, for having me, and thank you to the Douglas Week organizers for inviting me here. So I'm really excited for this conversation and how this chat is going to go. So I was born in Nigeria initially, and, you know, growing up in Nigeria, I was surrounded by all sorts of injustice, you know, poverty, armed robberies, insecurity, joblessness, homelessness, and all these different things that kind of shaped my view of the world. And I remember there was a particular politician who had been a bit corrupt when I was 6 years old, but he had come into power. And as a 6-year-old, I said to my mom, I'm going to become a journalist because I need to expose this politician. And so I always had this sense of injustice in my heart. But then the politician passed away and the dream kind of went with it. But then growing up, I always wanted to, I guess, make a difference. And initially, I thought I would do that through medicine. But then when I started studying law in UCD and seeing how really human rights law shapes the way policy is created, it shapes the way the government and other departments within the country can protect human beings, it really just kind of, everything just clicked for me, you know? And I remember coming to Ireland and even seeing the human rights issues that happen in Ireland, such as homelessness and mental health issues and discrimination faced by, you know, those in minority backgrounds. It really just showed me that every single space in the world needs human rights to be protected. And so that's kind of how it started for me, and it's grown so much. And I think, you know, going on my Fulbright to Indiana solidified what of my life, which is be a voice for people who need to be listened to and protect human rights at all costs.
Excellent. Well, I think you're off to a stellar start as it happens. I guess the same question, Raphael, you might have some commentary on that as well, please.
Thank you very much, Sarah. For me, it's similar, but story as well. From my point of view, from a very young age, I've always been a fighter, metaphorically. I was kind of the person from a young age that would speak out when I, would see injustice. And even looking around me, growing up in Ireland and elsewhere as well, you would see that not everyone have the stamina or the charisma or the ability to kind of speak out for themselves. And for me, I find myself speaking out or helping people who might not have the power to, identify the wrongs or even challenge the status quo where you see aspects of discrimination or imbalance or injustice. So at a young age, around 10, 11, people knew that I would be going towards the law before I actually knew I would go into the law. And then my law degree kind of helped me gain that foundation. It gave me that charisma and it gave me the foundation in terms of how to advocate, not just for legal matters, but for human rights matters, or even for areas of injustice, how to see and approach it using the system. The reason why I'm studying here is because I want to bring that further. I want to, take the knowledge from law and go with policy and look at the issues that are, causing, barriers or halting progress around the world in terms of governance, corruption, in terms of, just change. A lot of advocates in health or in social essential enterprise or so much more education are trying to bring about change, but there are some sort of barriers that is always halting it and preventing growth and progress. And for me, I gained the interest in terms of finding out what are those the barriers preventing change and why is the world not progressing to fix issues. For me, that really appealed to me, and it's an area that isn't touched on as much, but is an area that was coined in the University of Chicago. So for me, I want to make myself well-rounded to kind of tackle a wide variety of issues, and I think for me, it's a calling, not just to see and just accept the system the way it is, but to challenge it and to reform it if possible. Thank you.
Okay. And Matthew, your thoughts or where have you come from and where have you got to on this?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. So I suppose it's a little different to my kind of fellow panelists. Certainly, Raphael spoke about barriers. We both spoke about barriers, and I think my research kind of examines people who pushed against barriers in many ways, social activism and grassroots activism in particular. How I came to it, though, really was, I think, the Leaving Cert. So during the Leaving Cert, which is all the way back in 2009, so nobody do any math. Basically, we did a documents-based question on the Montgomery bus boycott in 1954-55. And I had been, to America on a number of occasions before, and when I was younger. And of course, it's like a playground for young kids. Like America's an amazing place when you're so young, and you don't see things that might upset you. You just see all the amazing things. I mean, Disney, all that kind of stuff. New York was just straight out of a Hollywood movie. And really, when I was 17, 18, I'm reading about this, and I'm like, this can't be where I've been before. This surely is a different country. And so reconciling that was really important for me. And I think, through my kind of undergraduate degree, I engaged in international theatre, came across the work of Mary Baraka. Studying Dutchman again was another eye-opening experience. This play that he staged in 1963, I believe it was. And again, just the stark reality of life for African Americans and other minority communities in America. And so it really developed from there. I did my master's. I really wanted to look at civil rights reporting or reportage during the civil rights movement. I was told that was more of a PhD. So I focused on the Black Power movement. And this was really where my interest was ignited. Because again, growing up in Ireland, we don't really learn about that, or we didn't learn about that. And so it was just so different and, so inspiring in many ways. And that's, kind of how I came to the PhD and the work on grassroots activism in Chicago. I know Chicago is very specific, and the work is translatable to other areas within America. But certainly, examining and exploring and researching these people who pushed back and said, no, I'm not going to do what I'm supposed to do, or you know, I'm going to make life better for a community of people. That just really kind of resonated with me. And you know, it was a pleasure, a privilege to kind of spend time in Chicago, talking with some of these people, doing oral history interviews with some of the people that I was writing about. And you know, we can talk more about that maybe later on. But yeah, that's kind of my primary focus, I suppose.
Okay. Matthew, thanks. And actually, just something you said there, maybe this is more of it's an ancillary, but maybe back to Grace and Raphael. But I mean, have you felt accompanied, or have you felt, you know, that you've met, you know, peers in the studies in the areas you've had, or do you still feel a bit avant-garde or leading a charge in that? Matthew, I think you probably connected already, so it might be Grace and Raphael. Maybe Raphael, if you have any thoughts on that.
I've met people in University of Chicago who have similarly aligned interests in terms of advocacy for a certain group, for a whole bunch of group. I feel our experience is a bit different. You know, I'm Black and Irish and come from Ireland, and I'm trying to, you know, deal with some issues that, you know, that apply to Ireland, but also the experience that I bring is from life experience as well, and might be different and skewed. But in terms of the people I've met, they are aligned in terms of they want to elevate, they want to advocate, and they want to, you know, make sure that they empower and they improve the lives and livelihoods of others. So yeah, I do see that there are a lot of people there that as we speak, even in our cohorts of speakers as we speak right now, there are a lot of people that are passionate about change, and we learn from each other, we share experiences, and we expose each other to new perspectives. And I think that's one of the great experiences that Fulbright offers, and I'm very fortunate for that.
Okay. And Grace, do you feel like a trailblazer among trailblazers?
That's an interesting question. I think, you know, before I went to do my Fulbright actually in Indiana, I didn't know a lot of human rights advocates. I knew a lot of lawyers in like the corporate world, not a lot of civil servants. I didn't know them either. And so I think doing my master's, and I was in this room with human rights advocates from all over the world. And I had incredible professors who had been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years. It just really painted a picture of you're not alone, first of all, and this work is worthwhile, and you can do it right, and you can really change people's lives. Because I think I got to a point where I was like, why are we still talking about human rights in this manner so many years later? But then when you meet people who have literally been doing this work, and they can tell you that, you know, they got a case through the courts and 1,000 people's lives were changed, it lets you know that this work is worth it, and things are moving, and we can keep pushing the needle. And if each and every one of us play our parts, we're literally contributing to a better world in different formats, you know. There's so much to learn from each other, and it's a privilege to be a part of a community of people who are so passionate about this kind of work.
Thank you. Just something you said there just reminded, when I was a child, I wanted to be a biologist, and I did eventually become a biologist, among other things. But my view was very simple as a small child, was that if you're human, you have human rights, full stop. And then you grow up in the world and realize that that can be impacted, and people's opinions change that view. So it's an interesting space. And I think it's probably fair to say it is beginning to thread through every part of our work and our lives as well. Maybe not as fast or in not every area that we like, but I think the work you're doing and the people you're connecting with, you know, is that it helps grow that kind of gravitas as well. Just because, you know, we're very much celebrating, I suppose, the Ireland and Frederick Douglass link, and I should say Frederick and Anna Douglass as well. We're very interested in the Anna Murray Douglass story as well. We're not specifically talking about it today, but it's been part of our award and our interest for quite a while. But you know, if you look at someone like Frederick Douglass, you know, are there parts of what he has done that could inspire you, or that particularly interested you previously or more recently? And, you know, do you see any of that influence deciding where you want to go next? And I'll probably just pose that question to Raphael, if you're okay with that first.
Of course. So in terms of answering, are they parts of his life that, you know, influenced me? I think, you know, Frederick Douglass is, one of the most incredible figures in history, especially in the U.S. history in itself. And there's so much incredible facts. For me, I see a little bit of similarity in terms of interests. I'm a kind of person that loves to not just pigeonhole myself into one particular interest, but to entertain, whether it's, law, entrepreneurship, arts, painting, learning, and doing so much more. And I read and researched Frederick Douglass, I was, first of all, really happy to kind of see that kind of interest, but also in terms of his own, although being abolitionist was his main priority in terms of going out and encouraging reform in the 1800s, he really cared about the people around him. He was the kind of person that was to elevate everyone else around him, and in a period where it was illegal for a man of his skin color to read and write, he not only taught himself how to read and write with the helps of the Irish boys and girls back then, but he taught people around him to read and write. So it's a matter of kind of elevating, not just as you grow and as you transcend. This is a person that was, came from slavery and then became the first Black man to ever go for the vice president's election. This is a fact that not many people know. He didn't win it, but the fact that he went from the huge trajectory and from slavery to the possibility of being a VP, that's just incredible. And it shows that the sky, that you can go beyond the sky. Don't limit yourself to people's expectations. And for me, I really enjoy and I'm very inspired by the uplifting. And for me, that means a lot to me. In the modern day, as much as we would like to say over the past 50, 60 years, we've moved slightly away from aspects of racism. It still exists, but the challenges of racism and discrimination back then has progressed a bit compared to it is now. But there are still new barriers and there's still new challenges in terms of, social mobility. And this is something that, in addition to my areas of studies and specialization, I cherish the most, and I would like to uplift and bring as many people with me as I go along. I see it as a responsibility, when life favors you and give you so much to advance yourself, you want to know how do you pass that on down. And funny enough, as I speak right now, I help people in terms of their professional goals, educational goals. But as I stand here and speak, Grace has helped me with my a lot. So when I had my interview for Fulbright, I was able to reach out to Grace, and she helped me in terms of gave me some tips and pointers in terms of how to approach and deal with it. And it's just a matter of passing down the knowledge and being helpful. So as she's helped me, I've helped others, and I think it's my responsibility, but something I really cherish and love doing. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Raphael. I mean, to some extent, that's why Fulbright, the program, has lasted so long. It's less about the program and more about the people and the engagement that comes with them. So great to hear that as well. And thank you, Grace. You got a wonderful Fulbrighter over the line as well. So congratulations on that. Matthew, any thoughts yourself on the same question, just about Frederick Douglass?
Sure. I think Raphael talked about his education and the fact that he was self-educated in many ways. Not only is that admirable, but the fact that he was able to change his thinking, to kind of, I suppose, mesh with societal changes in the US at that time is frankly remarkable. I think, he obviously wasn't your traditional pacifist. Okay, like he wasn't afraid to, I suppose, ruffle a few feathers where he had to. Okay, and I think that's the nature of activism. And I won't bore everyone to tears with the history of the US, but certainly, when the 14th, 15th Amendment comes up, Douglass, who has this idea of America, he wants the America, as the founding fathers thought, as this, nation for all, that this dream is always deferred. And he's very, very eager to let people know that, and to let people know that, this does not, the 14th Amendment does not secure citizenship for me because I'm, strictly speaking, not born of America, right? I similarly, by the 15th Amendment, don't have the right to vote because I'm not a citizen. And he's trying to bring people to this point where they come to realize that. Similarly, he's also pushing back against Northern, I suppose, to use terms, the term that we might use now is like allyship or allies. Of course, he had plenty of support of the Northern psyche and mentality. And actually, he, commented on a number of occasions that the North was in many ways worse than the South. And that's a narrative that we see then develop 100 years later, right? So I just think he was so, in many ways, he was so ahead of his time in his thinking. And, I don't like to use the term Renaissance man, but, his work is just so admirable, and that he wanted to realize this dream that then everyone became very familiar with, I suppose, 100 years later with Martin Luther King, as popularized that way. So, he really is a progenitor of this way of thinking. And for me in my research, again, I think, the threads of that are there. We go into the kind of 1960s and 1970s with Black Power. They're really embracing a lot of what Douglas was saying. So, yeah, it's super interesting to me. I think, he is a fascinating man. And long may all of the publicity, Douglas Week, long may that continue, because it's so important.
Certainly when it came to Ireland, he was viewed as a fascinating man as well, and I think that was probably surprising for many people at the time. Grace, your thoughts on that?
Yes, no, I think there's so many parts of his life that absolutely influenced me. I think, first of all, he was a man of faith. I'm a person of faith myself, and being able to put my faith and my passion for justice together is something that is really encouraging for me. But then to see someone like him doing it so many years ago and changing people's lives as he was doing it is really encouraging for me. Well, things like him being able to partner with his wife to push the work of civil rights. I thought that was incredible. Them helping with the Underground Railroads and literally housing 400 people, putting their lives on the line to literally free over hundreds of people. And then also he would say that he couldn't accept the right to vote as a Black man if women didn't have a right to vote. And I think he was, like Raphael rightly said, he wasn't someone who thought about only elevating himself. He was trying to take as many people as possible with him on that journey, and to make sure that everyone had access to human rights, had access to liberty, had access to freedom. And I think for me, probably one of the biggest things I have learned from his life is the ability to start with what you have. He started his first abolitionist newspaper from a basement. And sometimes, especially in our generation, as a young person, sometimes we're so perfectionist that we're like, oh, I need the right equipment. I need to buy a whole studio to start this podcast or to start doing these different things. But this is someone who said, what is in my hands and what can I do with it? And I think for me, that's something that's followed me through my journey of literally, even for example, the work I did with homeless people, it wasn't to start a whole organization and start to do big things, but it was as little as going out with a couple of friends and giving them care packs and, just seeing somebody's face light up because of a pair of socks. Sometimes you think you have to do the bigger things, but when you start small and you start with what you have, you can make change right in your space and right in your environment. I think for me, it's really encouraged me not to wait for the perfect time or the perfect amount of money to start something and try to make a difference. And I think as well, his ability to look past where he came from. When we think about our backgrounds, it can make us think so small, and it can make us doubt our ability and doubt ourselves and doubt whether we can even contribute positively to the environment that we're in. And so for him to be able to look at different people around him and say, oh, she's living as a free woman. How can I do that? She can read and write. How can I do that? He can do this. How can I do that? And be able to continue to think forward, even when he didn't have the resources, even when he didn't have the capabilities. It genuinely inspires me to not let my current situation define where I'm going or define my identity or define even how big my dreams will ever be.
Grace, I think you've just defined Frederick Douglass as kind of a social entrepreneur in terms of that starting process. But I think also kind of what all of you've said, and you've described kind of the high bar that he set, and not just in his time, but even in our time. And, not everybody's going to reach that, but I think the journey and everything we can do is useful to do that. And you talk about the frameworks and the supports from all that, and we'll come back a little bit to it. But I think to some extent, Fulbright tries to do that as well, tries to provide a framework for other people to advance from it. So at a larger level, I mean, I guess this is something that could be a wide conversation, so you don't have to cover everything, but really, what are your views of maybe globally the biggest successes, and maybe could you name a couple of successes and maybe challenges in the areas of human rights and maybe civil engagement, or pick some aspects of those? I might ask that question, Matt, if you wanted to kick off.
Yeah. Oh, look, I mean, like you were kind of saying, like anything global is just used broad. Again, I think, if I can again bore you all to tears by thinking it back to my research, I look at what happened in the kind of 1960s and 1970s. I think before that, in the 1920s with Marcus Garvey, you have this Pan-African movement that happens, that is, so important to the Black Power philosophy and the Black nationalist philosophies that develop in the 60s and 70s. And just thinking about global links to activism and to kind of social activism in particular, there are so many players within that who did so much good work that, again, we can all kind of, I suppose, learn from. And again, within the confines of my research, the Black Panthers are actually one party that I look at in Chicago. And, through the course of the research, I realized that they actually extended to Ireland at one point, to Northern Ireland in particular, during the kind of 1960, late 1960s civil rights marches with Derry, and throughout. And they sent a cohort of people there. They also sent a cohort of people to China. They actually beat Richard Nixon to China. It's one of those nice little historical facts. So they were invited. They learned so much, in that kind of interchange. I think this is where they implemented their van. They started hiring vans to drive around, crisscross the community, dispense free medical care, breakfast programs for kids, this kind of stuff. And it's those kind of global connections are really, really interesting. I mean, I think both Grace and Raphael will be much better positioned to discuss what's kind of happening at the moment, where those problems are. I mean, I could talk about it in a very broad way, but I think definitely leave it to people who know what they're talking about a bit better.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I'll come back to something you said there in a second, but Raphael, if you could add to that.
Thank you. So from my perspective, I think, following the World War, in the past century, we saw a change in terms of human rights. So, for example, the Declaration of the Charter of Human Rights, codifying a lot of human rights and saying this applies to everyone. In theory, it was there, but it wasn't applied. Now in the modern world, we see a lot of valuations from a diplomatic and a national point of view, linked to human rights. For example, if but the EU country wants to join the EU, there is an expectation that your regulation, that your values is aligned with the EU. It's not just a matter of financial regulations or the business side, but it's also linked to human rights. You look at catastrophes such as migrant issues, how the whole EU can say, how can we sort and deal with refugees issues to the extent, how can we support them? And you see human rights being placed at the center of a lot of actions and policies and motives. In the current world and in the current day, this might be seen as the minimum. There is a wide array of issues linked to human rights, but the matter is that the main aim is that at least something needs to be done, and constant progress and constant development is underway. I particularly think right now it's a matter of looking at those who do not have a voice. once we've focused on the core human rights, we now look at what are the next kind of rights that are linked to human rights. Your right to education, your rights to healthcare, and you might think that in a developed nation that everyone might have this right, but there is a lot of barriers. There's financial burdens. There's the impact, and if we have gender norms, or male more prioritized in terms of to go to school, and how does that impact the family? How does that impact the way the nation works as well? I consider this as human rights because it then impacts the whole generation of future generations to come. So for me, I see this as the issues that we're dealing with now, and this is stuff that is ongoing. Holistically, it is part of human rights, and something that I hope that in the next few years, myself, Grace, and everyone here, Matt, and the rest of the world can work towards to actually tackling and ensuring that we deal with these challenges. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Very, very interesting, actually. Grace, can you maybe add to that or bring your own slant to that?
Yes, for sure. I'd love to go off what Raphael said and say that, the codification of all of these human rights standards was a beautiful start. And I think, in human rights work, it's so easy to focus on the challenges, but taking a moment to actually celebrate what has happened so far is key. Slavery being illegal is a huge, huge thing that 100 years ago, many people probably couldn't have even pictured. And also women having rights to vote, women, being in high powers of decision-making, women being able to speak up, for example, the Me Too revolution, so many different things that women and people of color couldn't have even imagined. And I'd like to just focus on slavery and women's rights, because like you said, there's so many issues we could discuss here. But I think, I'd like to end by saying we have so much work to do, that whilst, we're not seeing the kind of slavery that would have happened a couple of years ago with, the cotton farms and people being forced to marry their slaves. In America at that time, we are seeing a lot of forced labor and a lot of modern day slavery and a lot of human trafficking, and detection for human trafficking is literally on a decline, and convictions are on a decline at about 27%, which is really scary to even think about. And additionally, forced labor still affects about 27 million people worldwide. And forced labor is literally slavery in a different term. But that being said, in terms of women's rights as well, apparently, according to the UN, it would take 286 years to actually close the gender gap, which is an atrocious amount of years considering how far we've come. But like I said, I would like to say we've come really far. We have so much work to do. We still have far to go. And so we must not get tired. But we are making good progress at the same time. And I'd like to end by saying, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala actually recently became the first woman and first African to lead the World Trade Organization. And for someone who came from Nigeria and for someone who is African and who is in this space, that is huge for me to see, because it sets an example, it sets a framework for someone like me to be able to say, oh, well, she did it, I can work towards that, or if I want something different. And so we are making progress, really good progress, but there's still a lot of work to do.
Grace, something I think coming from a commercial space I've always liked to do is I've always liked to, and this is more of a tech and science research and development, but is to put an underline under the success and say, okay, that's a success, full stop, pause, and recognize it and really feel that, and then move on and say, okay, the next plateau, this is the plateau, the next mountain we're going to do that. And it's interesting how you can manage a plateau and climb up the steps. I mean, the time can be complicated, and when it's broken down, and I think, Raphael, something you were talking about as well was you were talking about all the little successes that then history then turns around and quotes it as one big success, but actually how it got there was from many, many little successes. And it's useful, I think, to reflect on that. So we're quite interested in that question, I suppose, as a broader sense of what has gone well, what can continue to go well, and what can inform. And I had a little question, a side question, maybe for one person, if anybody wants to answer this. Do you think the learnings we get from development in human rights can be well applied or are being well applied in climate action, actually, because it has some of the same. It's such a big problem. The potential to become jaded quickly and forlorn about the development for it. So do you think there are any of the panelists, does any kind of thought jump out on that? Raphael?
Unfortunately, not to sound pessimistic, I feel like the world we live in is more of a reactive rather than a proactive world. So we wait for a huge disaster to happen. We get scared. We want to make sure that this never happens again, and then we react. And unfortunately, a lot of people just don't want to invest the time, the resources, and the energy to just deal with it and eradicate it at the beginning, where it's a minor risk. They're waiting for something huge like a flooding or a gigantic earthquake or tsunami to come and cause havoc and chaos and destroy lives before they can say, okay, now we need to invest in this. But I want to end up by being I'm a bit optimistic and saying that I think it's each individual people and the leaders that we have and we elect or that are born into it, into royalty and etc. that will drive the change. The change does come from the top, but also comes from those who are at all journeys and stages in their lives. But those at the top are the ones that we can push for higher responsibility to kind of go out and exact that change. So, for example, in the new king of the United Kingdom, for example, is one of the leaders that has gone beyond the expectations of not speaking about political matters, and he's King Charles is very down and advocates for the environment, and it's progress. But I'm very optimistic that as we go ahead, as we see and we live and experience the world that we're living in, people can see that it's impacting us positively and negatively, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we protect the world. And as the way the world has been there for us.
Grace, you had something to add?
Yes, I just wanted to add to what Raphael said. I think it's very possible that in this space we equate busyness to progress. And so where there's so many summits and so many conferences, we end up almost discussing the same thing and then not leaving enough space for implementation, because these things do take time to evaluate, to implement, to design, to strategize. And so where we have so much busyness happening in this space, not enough time is being actually taken personally. This is my personal opinion. Not enough time might be taken to actually implement what is being discussed. And so what you see is a lot of high-level dialogues and not enough actual action happening on ground. And I think secondly, one of the reasons I entered the space of human rights education was because I realized that a lot of individuals who don't work in this space, or care about human rights policy, don't really understand what is going on. And so we have 20-page, reports that we would read because that's in our space, that's our work. But a lot of people hear climate change and they think, yes, I'm just going to wait for this policy to tell me what to do. And I mean, there isn't much I can do, but there's so much we can do as individuals. Imagine if 50% of the people in Ireland, change their lifestyles just a little bit to be climate conscious, we would be making such a huge difference to the fight against world eradication through climate change. And so I think it's so important to, consider how we can educate people better on these issues as well, because when people feel equipped and they feel better educated on these issues, they're more inclined to act really conscious. And an example of this would be, when I was in Switzerland, when I was in Switzerland, they had like the nutritional scores on each item of food you would buy. And that straight away changed the way I did my grocery shopping, because I was now thinking, I don't want to buy an item that's an E. That's not good for me. And so I feel like the more people are educated, the more it's in people's faces in a way that they understand, the more they can actually make changes that impact this work that we're trying to do as well.
I think a little bit of akin to what you said a few minutes ago was that I've always enjoyed the saying, the 13th commandment is thou shalt not commit. And I think some of these areas do suffer a little bit from that excessive discussion, and not necessarily, particularly when you run out of time for action on that. So you've all been involved. You've all been part of the Fulbright family for a period, and I think you've embraced that and you've enjoyed that, and I think you understand that we very much try to create a platform. It's a platform that would not survive and it would not endure without what is known as the Fulbright family and that engagement. I mean, there's lots of opportunity. There's as much opportunity to an extent as you wish to take, or as little as you wish to take if you want to plow your own furrow. But, do you think, I mean, certainly we can get research in areas, but I think we're interested in the people and providing a platform for people like yourselves. And that's how we see ourselves as making a difference. Do you have any thoughts yourselves on maybe how Fulbright does or could or should make a difference? I might ask that question, Matt, if you wanted to kick off there.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think by continuing to fund just a diversity of research, coming from the humanities, I suppose there's that, and you will be very familiar with it, there's that kind of dialogue between people in humanities, people in STEM, and there's no research money for people who are doing humanities work, which of course isn't true. But that I was able to kind of go over and spend really important time researching in Chicago, doing oral history, spending time in the archives, stuff that I just ordinarily wouldn't have the opportunity to do. It means the research kind of, came to completion. And not only that, it's about meeting, people from all different types of backgrounds, every single different type of background you could imagine. And I think, as the guys were saying earlier on, you learn so much from that. So by continuing to fund, important projects and looking at it in that way, on merit rather than kind of going, okay, well, we have to fulfill a certain amount of criteria for, humanities or for them, whatever it is really important. And I think it's a huge strength of Fulbright that it does do that, and hopefully continues to do that going forward in the future. By creating those specialist awards as well, I think it's incredible. In my cohort, I think we had there was a cybersecurity award, which I'm not sure is still going or not, but I mean it is a fantastic initiative and so important. And the guys that I talked to there scared me a little bit in terms of just what's going to happen or what maybe will come to pass. But again, knowledge is our ally, and so if it continues to fund that, it'll make a huge difference. And then just to speak about the kind of global connections that Fulbright fosters, it's hugely important. And Dara, you may be familiar with having conversations with me before about this. I mean, I was saying before we came on the call that a good friend of mine from Chicago is now living in Dublin, and she's an RCSI. We spent 6 months or whatever in Chicago together, and then she was here, and it was really bizarre because it was after COVID, so it was kind of like it wasn't really happening. But then life kind of went on, and she came to my wedding last year, so it was really nice to have that. And actually, somebody else I met during one of the Gateway things came to my wedding as well. So, it was brilliant. And we still chat regularly on WhatsApp groups and on Zoom calls and all that. So, and they continue to update me on their research and what they're doing. And, that wouldn't be possible without, Fulbright. So, yeah, I think it's an invaluable asset. I've probably taken away time from both Raphael now, but.
Thank you. Yeah. Raphael, your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. I think diversity is the biggest, the biggest thing that Fulbright could prioritize, not just diversity in terms of background, but in terms of the interest and passions. I see each Fulbrighter as a champion of their particular area, and their Fulbrights in general. The institution has an incredible eye for picking incredible leaders and change makers in their fields. And I think, with like, from those in medicine to law, policy, whether if it's music or arts, they're all key change makers in their field. Some as small as art could be incredible in terms of capturing history, storytelling, and in terms of giving inspiration, or in terms of medicine, in terms of changing or finding cures for diseases and etc. Each field are important, and I think diversity in that aspect is incredible. But also support. Fulbright does a great job right now. Through Fulbright, I got connected with the Irish General Consulate in Chicago, and from then I got to meet some incredible organizations. Like in Chicago, there's the My Block, My Hood, My City, which are a group that help, and they help and they empower and they encourage the youth, the teens in Chicago, are facing some significant issues, and they're working with them to kind of to empower them. So I think the fact that Fulbright can identify key change makers, but also give them the skill sets, give them the connections, and give them the right support they can to go out and extend their outreach is an incredible thing, and I'm very grateful for it. And also the incredible network like Grace and Matthew here, and my cohorts as well. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Grace?
Yes, no, when I was applying for my Fulbright, everyone kept talking about this Fulbright family, and I didn't fully understand it. But, 2 years down the line, I'm like, this is such a huge family. And it's interesting. I think, when Raphael reached out to me when he was applying for his Fulbright, I was so encouraged that he was applying, because I wanted more people who looked like me to know that they have access to scholarships like this. When an organization like Fulbright says they believe in you enough to fund you to go and study in America, it does something to your mindset and your confidence. And I think that's made a difference for me a lot, because it's been a springboard for me. And I think with more scholarships like the Fulbright Frederick and Anna Douglas Award, the Notre Dame LLM in Fulbright is building and contributing to the next generation of change agents, people who will draw lines in the sand and say no to injustice with everything they have, every fiber of their body. And I think by creating, opportunities for people from disadvantaged backgrounds as well, we're empowering people to go back to the places that they've come from and tackle the obstacles that they faced, and literally set an example to say, these are obstacles, but we can overcome them. Here are the resources that you need to do so. And I think that's how Fulbright is making a difference. And, while I was in Notre Dame, they created this new university holiday called the Martin Luther King Jr. Day, where everybody in the law school had to go volunteer somewhere. And it was the most incredible thing. And I got to volunteer at this day center called St. Margaret's House, where it was run by women, for women in need of clothing and food, and they would also equip them with the skills that they needed to live a better life. And I wouldn't have had that experience at all if I didn't go all the way to South Bend to do my master's in Notre Dame. And so I think the Fulbright is already making a difference, and we can continue that by accelerating and increasing more opportunities for people.
And that's the gift and the challenge, I think, that we try to give, is that we empower people who are passionate to go from their areas. Matt, I think one of the things we're very interested in is, and the success is because the people who apply for Fulbright, people who are successful, there's a platform there, but they bring their own passion and power. And that's one of the things we're particularly looking for. It's less maybe about the areas. We try to be as broad as that. It's actually about the people. And the other thing is the basic tenet for Fulbright is cultural exchange. And if you really look behind it, that's actually about human rights. And that's where you start. If you recognize people as people, not as things or as other, then you also have to respect their rights. Or if you don't respect their rights, you should be definitively aware that you're not respecting the rights. And that is a start of an open conversation at the very least on that. But coming back then to kind of a wider aspect of the program, we're very interested in trying to provide the platform for Fulbrighters to engage both externally and talk about their work and where they want to go, and create links between Ireland or the USA or the US and the other 179 or however many countries are involved. And in Ireland, we have a commission, so commissions are a little bit different as well. They show that that both countries are very engaged in this program and this global program in it, with significant support from the national government. Sometimes the majority support comes from the national government. And that's because the US government, the Irish government wants to invest in people like yourselves who have that passion, who can progress in the areas of human rights, civic engagement, irrespective and beyond you guys, I suppose, because you're a little bit more specific. But people working in physics and people working in other areas, they are actually working on behalf of human rights to bring in their passion, whether they know it or not. And the Fulbright program allows for that. And I'm glad that you kind of, really do understand what it is we're trying to achieve. But at a very, very fundamental level, it is very much about yourselves and where you can go and where you will go. And, the baton is passed on, and you pass a bit of that on to the next people along and carry that forward. And that's why it is a family, and that's why it's been successful. It's not really a granting agency. It's more about developing people, and we do hope that we can keep making those difference. But really, the baton is firmly passed over to the Fulbright awardees and the Fulbright alum to continue that and pull other people along with you. And in a sense, while you might not be a Frederick Douglass, or who's to say, the fire could be lit and you may proceed forward, but there's an opportunity to be some version of a Frederick Douglass, and use the framework that's in front of you to do that. Just before we kind of close out, I just was interested, maybe you might have an anecdote that you want to share just from your experience. It can be amusing, it could be entirely relevant to human rights, or it might be just a very interesting experience that you had. So is there anything that you would maybe like to share with us at this point? I'll put that to Grace to start.
Yes, I mean, there's many anecdotes from my time. For me, I'm just remembering, the cultural exchange side of things. And when I was in Notre Dame, I actually signed up to teach an Afrobeat dance class. And a lot of my students did not know what Afrobeat was. They didn't understand where the music came from. And so it was very intriguing for me to literally start each class with an educational segment of what Afrobeat music was and why it was created, and even the dance steps, where they come from. And it was, in a way, it was interesting to be able to bring Afrobeats to this little town in Indiana and say, like, this is what we do. And we got to perform in front of the whole university. And I think for me, that right there, it might not look like human rights, but in many ways it's saying, like, we're bringing African dancing to these people who have never seen it before, don't fully understand it, and now they're like great dancers and they're telling their friends about it. And that for me was probably one of the highlights of my time in America as well. And I loved what Raphael said about, like, bringing all your different interests together, and it was amazing for me to be able to do that.
Brilliant, great to hear that. Raphael, anything from you?
Have to repeat and say that meeting Bernie Sanders, Senator Bernie Sanders, was one of my greatest highlights, especially in terms of the similar flair and passion for change. Senator Sanders is the kind of personality and character that would argue and push forward in terms of holding his people and close to his heart, and he might sometimes go against his own party, the Democratic Party, to argue and call out injustice in the world of finance or commercial or human rights and etc. He is a flare, he is a fire, and for me it was just a strange. It was like it was meant to happen. And I was on campus and I had a chance to just stumble across Senator Bernie Sanders. We had a quick chat. I got my selfie, and for me that was incredible. So next year, fingers crossed, I might have the same repetition with President Barack Obama. But yeah, I think for me that was a huge highlight in terms of saying you've idolized and seen this person from far, creating and exacting their impact across the world, and you got a chance to meet the person that you've inspired so far, and that you've been inspired by. So for me, that was a incredible, life-changing experience.
Well, hopefully you get another chance to meet him and be challenged by him, and perhaps challenge him as well.
Oh, I'd love to.
Who knows? Yeah. Say yes to almost everything and see where that leads to. And Matthew, any items from you?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I could talk about my Fulbright experiences all day, but I know we don't have time for that, and no one wants to hear it. But two that kind of stand out to me. I think the first was Grace mentioned the Martin Luther King Day event that you participated in. I also participated in one that was down in Hyde Park, and it was for a group called Rise Against Hunger. So it was putting together kind of food packages, but it was done in this, really, like, first of all, we started first thing in the morning, so everyone's kind of bleary-eyed and tired. But the energy of everybody there just kept us going for the entire day. And by the end of it, we were out in our feet, but we had packed, I don't know how many bags of food. But it was the most enjoyable experience because they had music playing, there was dancing, there was all sorts of things to keep everyone G'd up and active and enthused for what we were doing. And that really stood out to me. And that was on a particularly cold day in January in Chicago. So Raphael, you know probably all about that, or maybe you don't, I don't know, but the Chicago wind is pretty brutal.
Excellent.
So
Matt, I'm gonna stop you then at one, because
sure.
Surprisingly our time is almost up, and I just wanted to close off really by first of all thanking you all very much for an excellent conversation. I think there's so much information there. There's probably a master's at least in dissemination from that information, and I want to say thank you again to the Douglas Week as well for their engagement, their ongoing engagement with us. Just to mention that the 24-25 Fulbright US Student and Scholar program is currently open, and the 2024 Irish Wars are open. So please do apply. And thank you to everybody involved in the panel today. It's been excellent, very enjoyable. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.